Kelly, Holloway,
Present.
Hodges,
Here.
Heinrichs,
Here.
Klassen, Kiefer,
Here.
Hepner,
Here.
Lord, Oliver,
Here.
Bird,
Here.
Gilmore,
Here.
Johnson,
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Okay, we do have a quorum.
All right, I call to order the November 4th, 2019 Citizens Advisory Committee meeting. First order of business is citizens with CAC business to present to the CAC. Seeing none, we will move on to review and approve the minutes of the October 7th, 2019 meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Do I have a second? Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Oppose? Motion carries. Next order of business is review and accept the financial report through June. Yes, Heather.
I do want to point out that was left on the agenda in error. We do not yet have the financial report for this year. We will hopefully have it next month. We've experienced delays this year. So there's nothing to approve tonight.
Okay, very good. Next item on the agenda.
Whoops, just a minute. I had my light on.
I just see that now. Yes, Chris.
Are we going to make sure that we make the addition to the report that I requested last month?
Yes,
Okay.
you have requested a separate column for obligations, as I
Yes.
recall. And yes, we will have that on there. I was hoping that we would have the numbers for tonight, but unfortunately we just don't. So I'm confident we'll have them by next month.
Okay, thank you.
I shouldn't say that because it depends on HUD. So I'm as confident as I can be. That we
Yes,
will
with
have
HUD. Thank you.
All right. Next item is an action item of reprogramming of year 44 funds to year 45. Heather?
First, before I get started, I do want to just point out that at each of your places, you do have a copy of the request memo for the CDBG reprogramming amounts that was left out of the packet. But the pertinent information was included in the packet, just not actually the copy of the memo. So, for the benefit of our new members, I know that we have several, and this is something we only do once a year, so it's hard to remember. Actually, let me just slow down there a second. Speaking of new members, I failed to acknowledge we do have a new member joining us tonight, Austin Bird. David Freund was a mayor's appointment, and he resigned last month just due to work commitments, and so the mayor has appointed Austin in his place. So if you wouldn't mind, maybe we kind of did roll call, you kind of introduced yourselves, but it's to the chair's discretion if you'd like to repeat that, or I'm sorry that I jumped the gun just a smidge.
Sure. If anyone would like to introduce themselves, we'll start down with Martha.
Martha Neal, and I too was appointed by the mayor, and I live down on 2nd Street.
Hello, Austin. Welcome. My name is Mark Holloway. I was also appointed by the mayor as well, so welcome to the committee.
I'm Elizabeth Hodges. I was appointed by Ray Ambrose, 4th Ward.
I'm Joe Heinrichs, and I was appointed by the mayor quite some time ago.
I'm Fred Klassen. I was appointed by Mike Madsen.
I'm Chad Kiefer. I was appointed by Marion McGinnis.
Welcome, Austin, to the committee. I'm Jim Hepner. I was appointed by Alderman at Large Kyle Grip.
Hi, Tammy Lord, and I was appointed by Rick Dunn.
Welcome, Austin. My name is Vernita Oliver. Don't mind this. I was appointed by Maria Dickman, and she's 2nd Ward alderperson.
As we've established, I'm Austin Bird, and I was appointed by the mayor, and I live down over on South Nevada Avenue here in Davenport.
I'm Dale Gilmore. I was appointed by Rich Kluhl, 6th Ward.
And I am Reagan Johnson. I was appointed by our Alderman at Large, J.J. Condon, but I live in the 4th Ward.
I'm Christy Miller, and I was appointed by Rita Rawson, 5th Ward.
Nice to meet everyone.
You do.
And the new guy always buys drinks at.
Don't you first have to shuffle and do the name quiz?
So my apologies for skipping out of order there, but I wanted to make sure we had a chance to go through. So as I mentioned, since we do have several new members and that this is a process we only do once a year, so even for members that have been with us a few years, it is always nice to have a refresher. So the reprogramming process is a result of the fact that each grant year stands alone. So each grant year runs from July 1st to June 30th, and we have a number of programs and subrecipients that are funded each year, and those agreements end on June 30th. At that point, any funding that is unspent and unobligated becomes available for the reprogramming process, and that just means the CAC looks at requests for funding and determines which, if any, of those requests can be filled. A couple of things to note regarding the reprogramming process is that HUD establishes some caps on the funding. So primarily those affect the public services and also planning and administration. Public services is capped at 15%, and each year the CAC and City Council have decided that they want to allocate as much as they can under that cap to public services, and that is the case for this year. So in year 45, which we are currently in, we have allocated everything that we estimate is available for public services to public services. And that means that when we have funding left over from a prior year, year 44, just having money left over from a previous year does not increase the cap for the current year. So each year's cap stands alone. So unfortunately, the reprogrammable funds are not available at this time to public service activities, and that's just because of the way HUD has established the caps. What that does mean is that all of the funding that is available for reprogramming is available to only the non-public service categories. And that includes our planning and administration, our housing rehab activities, and our economic development activities. So in those categories, what the CAC has typically used as a benchmark is that we will not fund activities more than what they originally requested. However, in some years, what we have available is more than what was requested. And that's the situation we find ourselves in this year. We were very fortunate that we got a higher than estimated grant in the current year from HUD. But what that means is that the housing rehab activities and the economic development activities were for the most part fully funded, and as was the planning and admin activity. So in those situations, what the CAC has done in the past is to allow funding beyond the original request when there are funds left over from a prior year, as is the case this year. But that has to be done in the planning and administration capacity, making sure we do not exceed the cap on planning and administration. So for the current year, there have been 2 requests for reprogrammable funds. One is from the planning and administration activity, and one is from the housing rehab and neighborhood revitalization fund. So the planning and administration request is for $30,000. That is money that will be used for 2 purposes. One is for lead-based paint related training for staff. One is for covering higher than expected costs for a required HUD report called the Housing Needs Assessment. We have funded that in the current year, but our estimates came in quite a bit higher than what we were expecting. So that's a report we're sharing the cost with Rock Island and Moline. So each of our portions are higher. We're each paying equal parts. And being able to access reprogrammable funds will just ease the pinch on our budget a little bit. The second request is for the Housing Rehabilitation and Neighborhood Revitalization Fund. That is for the $169,892.25, because we do have to allocate every penny. And this request is being made to continue to assist with our urban revitalization efforts, our housing rehabilitation efforts. These are all things that were already identified in our application and our annual plan. We will just, as a result of having more funding available, be able to do more projects. So those are the two requests that were received. So tonight, the CAC will need to take several votes. The first is a vote on whether these applicants are eligible for reprogrammable funds. The second I take that back. The first is to say, will applicants be allowed to request funding for a larger amount than they originally requested? The second is to say, are these applicants eligible to apply? And the third will be to award funding in a certain dollar amount, if any, to the applicants. So those are the three votes that the CAC has the opportunity to take tonight. And I'm happy to answer any questions from anybody who has any.
Yes, Chris.
I have a couple of questions. The first one is on the 30,000. How much higher is the cost for the housing needs assessment than what was requested?
I believe we had originally estimated it would be in the 30 to 40 range, and it's actually 60,000. But remember, this is for shared report between Rock Island, Moline, and Davenport.
Right, and how much higher was Davenport's portion?
It would be 1/3 of that. So I think we were estimating. I think we were estimating 10 to 15, and it's actually closer to 20. It's 20,000 something.
So it's 5,000 higher, but 30,000 is being requested.
Well, first of all, not all of that is for the plan. We also requested in that same category training dollars. So we requested 10,000 additional for the plan. I have to actually give me the memo. I didn't bring it up here with me. Thank you. It's in the memo, which you didn't have in your packet, to be fair. I believe what we are requesting is equal portions for the 15,000 for additional funding. No, 10,000 additional funding for the plan, 20,000 additional funding. I apologize. I've confused myself here. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
I think it's reversed. We requested $20,000 for the plan, $10,000 for the training. And the reason for that is we decided to request the full amount for the current housing needs assessment plan. And that is because that will free up additional money and we can begin work earlier than planned on the Section 504 accessibility study. So that is how the dollars amounts were.
So it's going to shift money from the housing needs assessment to the 504 accessibility plan.
It will cover the shortfall on the housing needs assessment and also to help cover the expense of the Section 504 accessibility plan, which is the next plan that we're required to do.
Okay, and then how much money is left for training on the lead-based paint?
That is 10,000 of the 30,000, and that will cover 3 kinds of training. First of all, it's very expensive training.
Yeah.
I recognize that. The registration fee for the risk assessor, lead sampling technician training is $1,600, and you have to travel for it. So you have to go to Des Moines for a week. So we're sending one person to that training for the lead-based paint training. So that will be several thousand. We also have 2 rehab specialists that we would like to obtain lead-based paint contractor training for, and that will just give them more flexibility and knowledge in the types of work that they can do and oversee in our housing rehab program. And then the third kind is we do already have one rehab specialist who is already certified to be a lead risk assessor. And he does have to renew that certification every 3 years, so this will help to cover the cost of his recertification. And in
it's
the
not-
absence,
I'm sorry, it's not possible to bring a trainer here so that you don't have all the additional expense?
well, it would be more expensive. You'd have to have
Really?
at least 8 people in a class, is what my understanding, 8 to 10 people.
And places like neighborhood housing don't have people with that certification that we could then bring a trainer here?
Are you asking if they can provide the training?
No, I'm saying Neighborhood Housing Services does housing rehab.
Okay, I understand.
And there are other organizations that
Sure.
do it. Don't they have people that need that certification?
We can explore that option. It's not something we've traditionally done, but we certainly can explore that option.
I just think that it would save more cost in, housing for the week and food stipends, that more money could go through to an actual person getting trained
Sure,
rather than to what I call soft costs.
sure. That's something we can explore. We do intend to get the staff person trained in this current year.
Yeah.
So if that's something that could be arranged in this current year, certainly we could explore it. And if it isn't, we would go the route that we plan and just send somebody to training.
Okay, and I'm sorry, my 2 questions turned into dozens.
That's okay. That's all right.
On the top part, where the 169,000 and change is being requested, it says there's a balance of funds, but nearly 800,000 has been earmarked for projects. What's the balance that's not earmarked?
Virtually all of it is earmarked. So there's, in the current year, this gets back to our obligation discussion from last month. We have quite a bit that's already obligated to programs. And when we say obligated, we mean set aside for.
Sure.
So we have 300,000 set aside for an infrastructure project that's just about to begin. We have 300,000 set aside for the DREAM program that those projects are being selected at the moment. We also have 60,000 set aside for our accessibility ramp program. We have 30,000 set aside for down payment program. And then we have the remainder is for our emergency repair program. So
Okay.
those are set aside. Some of them have actual addresses identified at this moment, and some are still identifying the addresses that they will serve.
Well, and I understand the DREAM program, those monies are going to be gone. But without being able to see the numbers to know how much is really obligated and what the unobligated funds are, and I understand set aside, I'm talking obligated.
Yes.
So,
Well, and I think the important thing to remember here is when you set money into a revolving loan fund, which these dollars have been, from HUD's perspective, they are obligated. Like they are obligated. There's an extra step beyond that in HUD's eyes called committed, which is committed to a specific address. So all of these dollars are obligated by HUD definition. So
okay, I'm using my
okay, I
definition.
just wanted to
So-
be clear for everybody's benefit.
But, okay, then we'll use committed. So of the dollars, like the 60,000 for the ramps, how many of those dollars are actually committed to an address?
I think we have 2 at 10,000 each, about half. I don't have that right in front of me. I do have, if you look at your packet, in page 3, the third page, I believe, where it says housing rehab and neighborhood revitalization, we run down the number of projects that are in process at the moment, and those aren't dollar amounts exactly, but they're the number of projects that we're working on.
Yeah, but without the dollar amounts, it's hard for me
Okay.
to justify putting extra money in because last time I saw a budget, there was a large balance that hadn't been used. And
Sure.
we don't have dollar amounts on these numbers.
Well, I think that problem will be solved next month with your obligation column that you've requested. But there won't be a time when we provide information to the level of detail of each individual activity, if that's what you're asking? Or are you just looking for aggregates by program?
Aggregate by program.
Okay, so that we can easily provide.
So is it possible to put this vote off until we have that report?
Okay, yes, that is the CAC's decision, always to table if they so choose. What I would say is, when you look at the universe of projects, of places that money can be allotted to, there's really only three, and that is planning and administration, housing rehabilitation fund, and economic development fund. And economic development fund has at this moment a large balance of money that isn't committed to a project by an address. And planning and administration, with the request that we've placed here, will be at the cap. So there isn't at the moment another activity to place the funds in. So, and we do need to have the funding allocated in the HUD system. It can't just float out uncommitted to anything. So I think the question would be, if you choose to delay, where would the money be planned to go if not to housing rehabilitation and neighborhood revitalization?
Okay, I mean, that explanation is good. I understand it's got to be obligated, and this seems to be the only place left for it to go. I'm just concerned that we continue to add money to a line item if the money never gets used.
Well, I think the money is being used. I think the obligation column will help to clarify that for the next month, because the projects that are done in the housing rehabilitation and particularly the neighborhood revitalization, they take quite a while to come to fruition. And so the money is getting used. It's just, if you think about the kinds of projects that we do, like, for example, right now we're working on an infrastructure project. We began the planning for that project in May. We're sitting here in November. They've broken ground, but they're not completed, and they probably won't be completed till the spring. So the dollars are used in the sense they're committed to a project.
Sure.
But they haven't been spent because the projects aren't far enough along to spend them. And CDBG is always done on a reimbursement basis. So the work has to be done and then spent and then reimbursed. And that's just a time-consuming process. And particularly when you talk about big projects like infrastructure, but also housing rehabilitation projects, like, for example, the DREAM project that we were talking about, all of those dollars are exterior dollars. So the decision was made that the rehab that will take place will all be exterior rehab. And so there's a limited amount of exterior rehab that can happen in the winter. And so our full expectation is that though we will identify addresses and commit money to those addresses, the money will not be spent probably until May. So,
and I understand that
Sure.
it's not drawn funds,
Sure.
but committed.
Sure.
And that was my only thing.
Sure.
If we had an actual report that showed, you know, housing rehab, this is how much is allocated and this is how much is committed.
Yep.
Leaving X, that way we could then maybe look at this money and is it possible for us to earmark it, like for the DREAM program, for instance, because I know there are bunches more applications than there are funds.
Yes, and I think the intention is that the funding will go into the rehabilitation fund, and then administratively, the decision will be made, are those going to be committed to the DREAM specifically, or are they going to be made available to projects throughout the city? Because the DREAM is just a small area, so that isn't necessarily a decision that would be made at the CAC level. That's the decision the administration would be making.
Well, and that's part of my question. Is it possible for us as the CAC to say, yeah, we're going to give you those extra dollars, but it has to go to the DREAM program? Or
the CAC
is it always administration that decides?
Well, the CAC is a recommendation body, so
Well-
absolutely should the CAC as a group decide that you would like to attach a more specific recommendation to funding, that certainly is the CAC's decision to make. But the council in the end is the one that actually makes the, vote on the funding decision. But the CAC absolutely can attach recommendations in whatever form that they so choose.
And I misspoke. I realized it would be our recommendation.
sorry.
So.
Sorry,
No,
but
I'm the
yes.
one who misspoke.
Absolutely. The CAC can attach recommendations as long as those things are already in our consolidated in our annual plans. Because remember, at this stage in the year, we've already filed those documents. So like, we couldn't necessarily recommend funding for, I don't know, I'm trying to think of
A brand new program.
yeah, a brand new program that we've never touched before. Like, we're going to have a specific program, and all it does is put weather vanes on houses because they're cute, and we like rooster weather vanes on everything. Like, that couldn't be something.
Good
that
luck
we
getting one up
suggested
on my roof.
because it's not already in our plan. So, should the CAC make that decision, they can recommend any particular nuance as long as it's already in the plan. So, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Fred?
I'm sure you've covered it. I just want to make sure that new members and then old members that don't remember get the information. Where did the funds originate that are being reallocated? From
So
whence did they
that
come?
is listed in your packet. The funding came from 5 sources, and they're listed there. It's Family Resources, Vera French, Salvation Army, City Planning Administration, and also the Housing Rehabilitation, staff and supplies.
Any clue as to why that they were unable, like the city housing? That's a lot of money.
It is.
Any clue as to why they were not able to use it?
2 reasons, primarily. We always come in a little under budget. Typically, the Housing and Rehabilitation staff and supplies has ended the year, fortunately under budget. We've never gone over. So we would typically end the year with 30 to 50,000 that we would surrender back to the reprogramming process. This year, it's a little bit higher for 2 reasons. One, when the budget was done, it was budgeted for a staff person who made more money than the current staff person and then obviously retired. So that's part of it. And then the other part is we did have a staff vacancy for 6 months that initially was supposed to be filled in July of, we're talking last year, remember, this is last year's money. So it was supposed to be filled in July of 2018, and it was not actually filled until January of 2019, end of January at that. So we had a pretty lengthy gap. It's not the only reason, but that is the bulk of the money, I would say, was coming from those 2 sources.
Joe?
We requested in planning and administration, that's the only capped category that's being requested as part of reprogramming. And the original request from the city was significantly below the cap. And so now adding an additional 30,000 to that category does not exceed the cap. The other side of it, the rehab staff and supplies, is not a capped category. Or the housing rehabilitation fund is not a capped category. The larger of the 2 requests, the 169 request, that is going towards the loan fund. Yeah, it would go towards supporting housing rehabilitation and neighborhood revitalization in whatever form. So that can include things like housing rehabilitation, infrastructure. It can include the elimination of slum and blight, down payment assistance. It would just go to support all of the things that we already said that we were planning to do in that category.
Chris?
On the reprogrammable funds, the Salvation Army, did they draw any of the funds they requested last year?
They did. Do you want to cover this part, or do you want me to do it? They did. So for those that were on the CAC when the funding decision was made for the previous year, the Salvation Army applied for funding. After they applied for funding, they made some pretty large changes to their program in that they closed their shelter and decided instead to move to more of an office building and then do supportive services and emergency funding rather than to operate a shelter. And the transition to that new service model took some time. As a result, the CDBG funding was not made available to Salvation Army until October 1st because their new location was not open for the first quarter of last year. So we're talking about October 1st of 2018. And then I think in planning and designing and implementing their new model, I think they maybe had some estimates that were not the best, it being the first year that they had switched to this new model. So I think it was kind of a learning year for them. Also, they too had some pretty lengthy staff vacancies in that they had people who would start and then move and then start and move to a different position and start and move to a different position. And so they had a lot of vacancies. And since what we do pay for with CDBG primarily is the staff time, that left a lot of money on the table. What I will say about that is we had multiple conversations with Salvation Army about it as the year progressed, and they weren't drawing down the money, giving them the opportunity to revise if they so chose, add staff people, and I think it being a learning year for them, they kind of just decided to let it be what it would be. But Dawn in particular has done a lot of really good work with them, with technical assistance, to help structure this year's contract, the year that we're in a better way for them, that they're more likely to use all of the funding that they were allocated. But they did leave quite a bit of money on the table. I think their grant last year was somewhere in the neighborhood of $22,000, and they left $13,000 on the table. So they did not make full use of their grant. And that is absolutely something the CAC can discuss with them when they come in, if they choose to come in for an application for year 46. If those are questions the CAC wants to ask, the application cycle is the prime time to ask those questions.
Bernita, were you trying to be recognized?
What? Okay, sorry. I want to go back. You said there will be an itemized report of the breakdown of some of the commitments that for the request?
Yeah, by category, yes.
When will that be?
We were hoping to have it for this month when we had our new financial report out, but we haven't received those numbers yet.
Okay.
So ideally, we'll have the numbers next month, and we will have that broken out for you next month.
Thank you.
Mark?
I had a question about, you said a lot of the funds were used to remove slum and blight.
It's an eligible activity.
Eligible
It's
activity.
not that a lot of funds necessarily have been used.
Sure.
It's an eligible activity within that category.
So my question is, does an organization have to request funds to remove the slum and blight, or does someone simply need to bring that to the attention of the city?
It could be both. If there was an organization that, had some eligible idea or activity they wanted to pursue, they could apply through the normal application process. Otherwise, if there are neighbors that have concerns or if there's any issues that they would like to identify, we do have the Neighborhood Services Division, and that's primarily who deals with those kinds of issues. And then of those projects, if there are any that meet CDBG national objectives, those would be the kinds of projects that we could potentially use the CDBG funding for. So those would be things like primarily demolishing buildings is primarily the main slum and blight activity. Mm-hmm.
Austin?
If I could just point out just a technicality.
Sure.
I see in our packet, it's 199,892 on the memo. It says, subtracting the 30,000, 169,893.
Okie dokie.
Just $1,
I got
but
a dollar.
just a
I'll throw in.
technicality I wanted to point
Rounding
out.
error. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for letting me know. 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay.
Yeah, we're taking the buck away from admin for us.
That's okay. You can do that. I'll allow it. That's totally fine. You just say $29,999, and I will note that in the minutes. That's all I have. If you have more questions, I'm happy to answer them. Okay, so then there's 3 votes that the CAC, if they choose, can choose to follow. The first is whether or not you'll allow applicants to exceed their originally requested amount.
Jim?
I so make that motion.
Any discussion? All in favor? Fred?
Question, if, just for throwing it out there, if we didn't let them exceed the amount, then we would have nowhere to go with that money, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And that's just a fortunate circumstance of getting a larger than expected grant this year.
That's a
I
beautiful
know.
thing.
Is this a roll call vote or?
It doesn't have to be.
Okay.
It's a simple majority, so.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Yes, Jim?
I move the second recommendation.
And for the record, the second recommendation is to vote on whether or not the applicants for reprogrammable funds are eligible to receive reprogrammable funds.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay. And the third is how much, if any, each of the applicants for reprogrammable funds will be recommended to receive.
Chris?
I make a motion that, I don't even know how to word it, but that the 30,000 for the admin professional services and that the 169,893.25 is recommended to go towards the DREAM program.
Okay.
Do I have a second on that motion? Fred?
Again, can we can recommend it goes toward the Green Dream program, but we can't, I don't think, specifically tag it for that program.
That's why I said
Okay, so what we'd have to do is first vote on it going to that area, and then vote on a recommendation to make it for Dream, I believe.
I believe that's a correct statement.
Okay. So they'd have to kind of restate that motion, maybe?
She would have to, you would need to revise your motion, and then your second would need to accept that revision.
And so this is for the general or just for Dream?
This would go to the Housing Rehabilitation and Neighborhood Revitalization Fund, and we'd make that motion, approve it, and then you could make a motion to recommend that a chunk or all of it goes to the DREAM program.
So it's been changed, the original.
Right.
And I'll change my original motion, and I will move that we, approve, recommend these funds. Whoops, wait, you're pointing at something.
Yep, just that third thing. Could read that verbatim.
Okay, my motion will be, the CAC will recommend the amount as requested to be approved.
Okay. For both,
Do I have a second?
the planning and admin and the housing rehabilitation. Is that my understanding? Yeah, okay. Yep, just wanted to double check.
Do I have a
And then
second?
your second would need to accept the revision. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep.
Martha?
That's the program that the city initiated this year that will provide $25,000 in funds to persons buying in a targeted area and $15,000 for homeowners for improvements in the targeted area. And it's forgivable money to them.
The new homeowner funding is only available from the city's capital improvement fund. CDBG funds are not being used for the new homeowner activities in the Dream area.
Okay, so it's just the 15,000 per owner-occupied house for improvements in the targeted area. And just as a side note, that money is more than spoken for with the number of applications that came in.
Is that public yet? Then we can't say it.
What do you mean that's not accurate? My understanding from every meeting is that
There
the
have been-
applications far exceed the amount of money available.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, all in favor of the, Jim?
Would you read the motion that we're voting on?
Yes.
Please.
My understanding of the revised motion is the CAC votes to recommend that Planning and Administration and the Housing Rehabilitation Neighborhood Revitalization Fund be funded at the requested amount with reprogrammable dollars. Okay.
All right, any other discussion? All in favor? Oppose? Motion carries.
Oh, no, I
Yes,
haven't been
Chris.
doing too good at this so far tonight. I recommend that the amount that was requested for the Housing Rehab and Neighborhood Redevelopment Fund be recommended to further fund the DREAM program.
Do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
Yes, Jim.
Who are we making the recommendation to?
That's a question for the maker of the
We
motion.
can only recommend these things to city council.
I understand that. So you're making a recommendation from the CAC to the council.
Yes.
Can I just ask who seconded? I heard somebody down here. Oh, you had Austin, you had Jim Ossoff. Okay. Okay.
Yes, Martha?
It would be just generally available. Well, there'd be several, I suppose. It would be generally available within the rehab fund for any eligible activities, including the DREAM program, but also including, as Mark asked, slum and blight removal activities, down payment assistance, our emergency ramp program, our emergency repair program, and rehab outside the DREAM area, and emergency repairs anywhere in the city. So all of those are programs that are ongoing alongside of DREAM. And I would point out that $300,000 already allocated to DREAM in the current year is a pretty sizable chunk of what is available. So once you take the 300 of DREAM, the 60 for the ramp program, the 30 for the down payment programs, that isn't leaving a whole ton of money available elsewhere in the city outside of those programs. That would be my only comment in that realm.
Reagan?
Thank you. I guess I'm confused. My question is, so even all those funds, any funds that are in the housing rehab and redevelopment program, how that money is spent is a decision of administration, not necessarily council. Is that correct? Council, it doesn't approve every single project. That's
Correct.
okay.
Yeah,
So even if we vote no here, there's a chance that all of that money could go to the DREAM project theoretically,
Yes.
but may not.
Yes.
Even if we vote no.
Well, I mean, the council
Yeah.
makes the ultimate decision.
Right.
Yeah.
But basically it's still going to go to
It'll be in the fund for all.
and
the
be
things that are
available for the
eligible.
DREAM project.
Yes,
Okay.
DREAM included and all of the other things included too.
Okay. Thank you.
Fred?
Sorry, my microphone wasn't on, and I think I'm talking out of it. The reason I'm recommending the DREAM program specifically is because I know that there are applications that will far exceed the funding. And since we didn't have the financial report, we don't know if these other ones have funds that are actually obligated per project in excess of what were budgeted.
Fred?
Yeah, my question is, now, if this did all go to the DREAM at 15,000 alone, that's 100 loans. And
It's
would there, pardon me?
Isn't it?
Is it 10? Okay, my math skills. Okay, 10 more homes. Okay. Did we have 10 more? Did we have 10 more than that were funded?
Well, I know they have not selected, you know, the completion process, the selection process of the DREAM program is not complete. So I don't think at this point we 100% know how many of the applications are eligible. Because I think the thing you have to remember, the DREAM program is a big program and it includes non-federal and federal funding. The federal funding has rules, just as all of our other programs do. So we may get, you know, 100 applications for those 10 spots, but it comes down to how many of those 100 applications are eligible. So the number of applications isn't necessarily indicative of how many are actually eligible for funding after those applications have been evaluated. So the risk in setting aside money only for DREAM program within the overall CDBG program is that if there were not enough applications that were eligible and that money was solely committed to DREAM, it couldn't be spent then on other activities in the city that aren't DREAM. So that would be the risk there.
That was my next part. Next part of my question was that money has to be used or it's gone. And if it was just targeted for one specific use, would they be able to use it someplace else if there weren't enough eligible?
If I mean, it's all ifs here, but if the CAC said we are recommending that you use this money only for DREAM, and the city council took up that recommendation and approved it, then it would be set aside only for DREAM, would have to go through, if for some reason it needed to be made available to other activities, it would have to come back through the CAC and the city council to move it to other eligible activities within that same housing rehab and neighborhood revitalization fund.
So I would prefer that we stated it as a priority, give priority to DREAM rather than commit it all to DREAM. That's my own
That's a fair
preference.
statement.
Joseph? Chris?
Okay, I'll amend my original and say that I make a motion that I don't know how to phrase it the way Fred said it. Yeah, please do. Okay, what Fred said.
Okay. So what I wrote down is the CAC recommends that the DREAM program be given priority. Okay, I can write that in dispersing the reprogrammable funds. Okay. Do you accept that? Okay, so you amended it, and we had several seconds, so do all the seconders generally support that? Okay.
Elizabeth?
I guess where my concern comes in, having served in this committee for several years, along with some of my other colleagues here who have served a long time, we've seen tremendous improvements over the years with the DREAM program and putting rails and ramps, et cetera, because it was a very, very rough road. And I guess my concern is to put it all into one pot when need is just out there for all these areas. I mean, to me, I could see saying, I would like to recommend X number of dollars for the DREAM program because, you know, it's a wonderful program for new homeowners, but yet maybe another dollar amount going to this program or that program. I just have issues with everything going into one, having served as long as I have and seen a lot of things come and go, and that's why I do have my concerns. I think the thought behind it is great, but I have concerns just because of being on here with my history.
Mark?
It would be available in the fund, and DREAM is part of that fund, and so are many other things. So it would be available to DREAM, it would be available to ramps, it would be available to down payment, it would be available to everything that's eligible in that category.
Jim?
I think it's important to remember that we have a very large and capable city staff who oversees all of these programs and would be very capable of making a decision as to the best place for this money to go.
Vernita?
It's a recommendation. You know, that's all that we can do at this point. If it's something that we feel as a committee, we've come together and the votes are in and they are valid, you know, then the recommendation would go ahead and, you know, go through. I like the idea, I love the idea of seeing that itemized that itemization
Yep.
of the funds that were, you know, what goes where, what has not been used, because to me that gives a lot of clarity and it helps to assess the situation better. So.
Yep.
Austin?
I think as Jim said, you know, I trust we have a very capable city staff here and to make these decisions. I think as we're sitting here, we're making a recommendation, something that we would like to see at least some of these monies go toward what's proven to be a very popular program here in the city of Davenport. So I think along with it being simply a recommendation, staff will do the right thing, but I think voicing our support for this to be one of those, for it to be a top priority among the other things considered.
Martha?
One of the problems I see is that I hate to see the ramps not included. So, I mean, everybody has a very good idea and all of the programs are good. But I'm not sure one's better than the other. If you need the ramp, that's pretty important to you.
Chris?
It's not that the ramps might not get any money, it's just that we're recommending that a priority be given to the DREAM program only because I've followed all of the reports of all of the applications that have come in, and they far exceed the dollar amount available. And I don't understand what you meant when you said that they may not be qualified. Has income not been certified yet?
I believe they're in that process at the moment. So there are many people who have applied, and those verifications are in process and I think complete.
My point is that you have to work through the application because for federal funds you are either eligible
Mm-hmm. So we don't know yet the fallout rate on that.
Correct.
Okay, but those applications, that cutoff was September 1st, wasn't it?
Yep.
Do we know how many have been certified yet?
I'm going to refer you to administration on that question.
Okay.
That's a process they're going through. So I think that would probably be the best place to discuss it.
Okay, well, I guess I'm going to stick by my motion to prioritize for the DREAM program.
Joseph?
My concern is that the area where we need the most work at is the area which the DREAM program is focusing on. And I'm not sure when another opportunity like this will come up. And if we can take advantage of it with this opportunity, because this was money that was not planned on. And if we can use it to work with our inner city to do even more to bring it up, that's why I feel that it's important that we let that emphasis be known.
Fred?
Again, that's kind of why I wanted to say it was a priority, that we recognize it as a priority. And still, it's up to the administration to make the final decision. We're not saying it has to go anywhere. We're just saying, hey, look at this. Was the reason I couldn't be for it if it was we want it to go there. I can't do that. But I can say that we would like you to consider it a priority. I'm okay with that.
Okay, should we take a vote on this?
At the chair's discretion.
Okay. All in favor of Chris's motion? Jim?
Can we have a roll call vote? Roll call vote, please.
Yep, absolutely. Do it with me so we don't get any wrong. Obleton? Yes. Neal?
No.
Kelly is absent. Holloway?
No.
Hodges?
No.
Heinrichs?
Abstain.
Klassen? Kiefer?
No.
Hepner?
No.
Lord?
No.
Mac? Oliver?
No.
Bird?
Aye.
Okay. Gilmore? No. Johnson?
Aye.
And Miller? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The noes have it.
Motion does not pass.
Okay.
All right. Next order of business is the year 46 application and evaluation criteria.
So I provided to you copies of last year's application packet for review. So I had sent it out last month. I did get a set of revisions from Chris Miller. I did send it out again last week. So this would be your final opportunity to suggest or discuss any changes. And then once I have them from you, if any, I'll send out the revised one to you via email so that you can look at it before we use it for the application process, which will begin in December. There's not a vote for the application, if that was going to be the question. So yeah, you don't have to vote on it. You just have to provide me comments. And the thing I would remind just about the application is there are things that USAAC may want to know, but there are quite a few things on there that we as staff have to know. And so quite a bit of the content is because we have to have it, more so than like somebody specifically has requested it through the years.
I'm sorry. So you said you did make some revisions to it?
This is the same one I gave to you last month.
Oh, okay.
I just meant the only revisions I have received were from Chris.
Oh,
I didn't
okay.
receive any,
Okay.
others.
So this doesn't include the
No,
hers.
this is
Okay.
just the same
Got it.
packet. She, Chris and I talked last month. I think she thought she was supposed to turn the revisions in last month, so she just gave them to me when she did them. I don't think I was very clear in my email. So.
And I think it might help is that if the changes, is there some way to note those on the revised one? that comes
Usually,
out so everyone sees it?
yep, usually we'll put those in color. So we'll put them in a color so that you can see if there's any changes there. Anything else from anybody or on the application?
From previous years, has there been anything that you felt that was missing or excessive or?
From a staff perspective, I can tell you, so it's evolved a lot since I started. So this, believe it or not, my long-term CAC members in December will be my 10 years with the city. It feels like I just started, but so in those 10 years, I can tell you it has changed a lot. The application, not just the application itself, but the application process. It's evolved a lot. I would say the last 3 years or so, and some of our longer members can help me with that. I think the CAC it's for the use of the CAC. The CAC is the end user of a good chunk of that information. We as staff, there's stuff we need, but as we add and change, it's been mostly at the CAC's request, because as you're reading through the applications, there's things that you want to know more about, there's things you want to know less about. So I feel like in the last 3 years or so, we seem to have reached kind of a point where people seem happy with the application in the sense that it's giving them the things that they need. Now, I do know there's some dissatisfaction with the quality of the applications being turned in the sense that maybe the applicants aren't giving it maybe their best attention and their best try. And just as we always do, once I set the date for the application workshop, which will be the first week in December because Thanksgiving is so late this year, so that'll be the first week in December. I'll send that out to the CAC. We always welcome the CAC to attend. So if you feel like you want to come and talk to the applicants about what you find useful in the application, I know several of you have said that that was something you're interested in. We as staff support that. That said, I don't think the incompleteness of the answers necessarily speaks to a flaw in the application. I think it's maybe just more people are rushing and they're busy and they get in maybe a little bit of a habit and just kind of gloss over things, copy and paste. So
They're graded on that, so.
yes, and that is what I was going to say. So I would say in the last 3 years, if there's changes to anything, it's been more the evaluation criteria more so than the application questions, in that there has been some tweaking and some realigning of how the points line up to put the points where the CAC currently finds the value. So I would say that's been the evolution the last 3 years, whereas maybe the 5 years before that was really fine-tuning the application.
And see, I disagree wholeheartedly.
And that's totally fine.
Because having been a person who completed many $1 million worth of grants, is that if you want the money, then you pay attention. And that's why you have the signature, and that person should be verifying that everything's there. Not putting a budget in, to me, is a glaring error. And whether or not they get discounted points, I still have an issue with somebody getting money just because they threw together some papers and turned it in.
I think there are people on the CAC who share that opinion. And then my reminder for new people and seasoned people as well is that so in the scoring process, applicants they apply for funding, and the formula at the CAC's choice. So the CAC had, you know, a hand in developing the process, assumes that all of the applicants will be funded at some level, depending on their score. But then on the allocation night, the CAC has the opportunity with a 2/3 majority vote to change those recommended funding amounts. So to increase them, to decrease them, to zero them out. And the CAC has done all of those things in the last 5 or 6 years. I mean, we've had the CAC decide with a 2/3 majority vote to defund activities entirely. We've had the CAC increase some funding for others and decrease some funding for others to send messages. We've had all of those things happen. So the formula is not set in stone. The CAC at the end of the day still has control over what the final recommendations to council end up being. And so the CAC, in my view, has two opportunities to weigh in. One is with their individual scores when they're reading through the applications, and the second is on allocation night, having the opportunity to make motions to increase or decrease funding in situations where they feel that the formula isn't reflecting what they feel the funding amount should be. So there's kind of two opportunities in that sense. Hopefully that answers it. It's kind of a roundabout way to get to it, but.
Any other comments on the evaluation criteria? Martha?
Oh, alrighty. It feels like there's always an error. There's one down here on the corner. If anybody has any changes, just note your changes on the one on the corner of the table, and I'll get you a revised one. Well, I'll note it. We'll do it. I'll send it by email, then I'll save some trees. So you write it down here when you're here.
I just realized we're being broadcast.
Yeah, don't put your address out there. Yeah, yep.
All right, any other comments on the year 46 application and evaluation criteria?
My final thing is just if you have any changes or suggestions, speak or forever hold your peace by Friday, and I'll try to get that revised one out to you next week for review, because we will be using it the first week in December, and I don't want to, you know, run up against Thanksgiving holidays and all of that jazz. So Friday is the deadline if you have any changes or comments.
All right, next order of business is other business.
I have only one item of other business for you. Well, technically two. The first is just a reminder that the calendar for the upcoming allocation cycle is there at the bottom of your agenda. So we're going into our busy season for the CAC in that we're starting our allocation process. Last month, you remember, we voted on the local objectives. Typically, we would meet in December to cover any extension requests for audits from subrecipients. We did not receive any extension requests for audits, so that means if the CAC would so choose, you can opt to cancel the December meeting. Recognizing that if some pressing business arises that requires CAC action, we would have to meet anyway, and I would notify you by email if that were to occur. But if you want to cancel the December meeting, that's your decision. And then after that, all these January, February, March meetings, buckle down, they will not be canceled. So we're actually going to meet all of those days. So those are my two things. One, here's the calendar. Two, if you want to cancel December, you can cancel December.
Fred?
Yes, I was going to do two things. First of all, I'd like to commend Mark Calloway for extending his commitment to public service by running for school board. Very nice. Thank you. And then secondly, I was going to move that we cancel December's meeting pending any emergency need to meet, which I assume staff would notify us of. But my motion is to, at this time, since there were no audit extension requests, to cancel December's meeting.
I was like, wow, that took a long time for a second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, our plan is we're gonna finalize the application or, incorporate changes next week, set the date, and then we typically will get the date out to the, potential applicants. So we do a media release, we put it out on social media, we publish it in the paper, and then we obviously send it to our current subrecipients because we know who they are. So, we send those things out and we try to do that 2 to 3 weeks before the event. And that'll be the first week. It'll be either Tuesday or Thursday, the first week in December. It just depends when the room is available.
Did I miss it? You didn't include the CAC in that list of...
Oh yeah, we tell you, we notify the CAC via email. I'm sorry, I went off on a tangent. Yes, we notify the CAC via email and everyone is welcome to attend.
Did you hear what she just said?
I didn't.
She's gonna tell everyone but me.
Oh, no, I would never do such a thing. Never, ever. I will, you'll all get an email notification of the date of that event. Yes, you will. And you get that, good point, you get that notification for 2 reasons. One, you're all welcome to come, and we would love it, those of you who choose to. But also, we rely on you to send it out through your personal and professional networks to nonprofit groups that you feel may be eligible or interested. I would take this opportunity to remind you that if you are personally affiliated with nonprofit groups and you have either a decision-making or financial interest in those groups, we would need to have a conversation about conflict of interest if they were awarded funding. But that would be my only caution. But otherwise, we would like you to publicize them for us, so I'm kind of using you.
Fred?
Yes, I would also like to commend Chris Miller for extending her commitment to public service by running for alderperson. So, very nice. Thank you.
Austin?
I just had a question for Heather. And maybe this is, I'm new, so I'm not sure on this, but you mentioned, when we were talking about the lead abatement earlier, you mentioned we're involved with 2 other cities, Rock Island and Moline, in collaboration with that. And as time goes on, things get more expensive, they don't get cheaper. Is Bettendorf interested in collaborating, and would that maybe be a cost-saving area to, share the cost with another city?
I think one reason that Davenport, Moline, and Rock Island tend to collaborate on these kinds of requirements more often is because all 3 of us are grantees for the CDBG program, and so we all face similar requirements. And lead-based paint requirements are requirements that are triggered in federal programs, but not necessarily with other dollars. And Bettendorf doesn't receive any of those federal dollars, so I think I think that is why perhaps there isn't quite as much involvement between those cities. But certainly if we go the route that Chris suggested of trying to get a training down here, we can make that offer to Bettendorf. If they have any staff they want to send, we can give them that opportunity. Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't work with Illinois because the Iowa license does not translate to Illinois or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, each state. Yes. That's correct. So when I say we collaborate with Rock Island and Moline, our requirements from the federal government are different, but you're very correct that the state requirements are different, and it's the state that issues the lead license. So, yep, it's always something.
Do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second? Discussion?
Was that Reagan that seconded?
All in favor? Oppose? Motion carries.
Okay, I will see you all in January. Happy